The quiet neighborhood sits undisturbed as a group of armed men approach a modest home. They move with confidence, certain their target, a seemingly ordinary person living a simple life, will offer no resistance. What they don't realize is that behind this peaceful facade lies someone with a deadly past, skills honed through years of violence and danger. As they close in, one thing becomes clear. They've just made the fatal mistake of threatening someone who never truly left their dangerous former life behind. This initial moment of calm before violence erupts serves as the foundation for any compelling hidden identity narrative. The power of these stories lies in their sharp contrast between perceived weakness and actual strength, between the tranquil present and violent past, between the face someone shows the world and their true capabilities. This contrast creates the dramatic tension that propels the narrative forward and keeps audiences invested in the inevitable revelation to come. The first phase of this storytelling structure focuses on establishing a convincing false reality, one that will soon be dramatically shattered. We meet our protagonist in their current life, one carefully constructed to hide who they truly are. Perhaps they're a high school teacher whose students would never suspect they were once an elite operative, or a quiet bookstore owner who previously served as an underground fighting champion, or even a soft-spoken parent whose neighbors have no idea they once led a criminal enterprise. What makes this setup effective is how thoroughly we establish the protagonist's present identity. We see them engaged in mundane activities, cooking dinner, helping with homework, working their unremarkable job. We witness small moments that humanize them and establish what they value in this new life. Maybe they take special care tending a garden, suggesting a desire for nurturing growth rather than destruction. Perhaps they volunteer at a local charity, attempting to balance the moral scales from their previous actions. These ordinary moments gain extraordinary significance once we understand the violent capabilities that lie dormant beneath. During this setup phase, the narrative must establish what the protagonist treasures about their current existence. What have they built that's worth protecting? Common elements include family relationships, romantic partners unaware of their past, hard-earned community respect, or simply the peace that comes from walking away from violence. These elements become the emotional stakes when threats emerge. We understand exactly what the protagonist stands to lose if their carefully constructed life collapses. The setting itself often reflects the protagonist's desired transformation. Peaceful rural landscapes, quiet suburban neighborhoods, or close-knit small towns symbolize the tranquility they've sought. These locations stand in stark contrast to the environments of their previous life. War zones, urban underworlds, or high-stakes operational theaters. The physical space itself tells part of the story, with the protagonist having deliberately chosen surroundings that reinforce their new identity. Though the protagonist appears settled in their current life, effective narratives plant subtle hints that something lies beneath the surface. Perhaps we notice unusual security measures in their otherwise ordinary home. Maybe they react with surprising alertness to sudden noises. They might demonstrate unexpected physical capabilities in innocent contexts, exceptional reflexes while playing backyard sports, or unusual strength when helping a neighbor move furniture. These moments foreshadow the skills that will later be revealed without explicitly exposing their origin. The protagonist often demonstrates hypervigilance disguised as ordinary behavior. They habitually sit facing doorways in restaurants, unconsciously scan rooftops while walking down streets, or maintain awareness of exits in public spaces. These behaviors, presented subtly, suggest the ingrained habits of someone who once lived with constant threats. While these actions might simply register as personality quirks to those around them, the audience recognizes them as signs of specialized training or experience. Another critical element during this setup phase is establishing the protagonist's reluctance to engage with anything resembling their former life. When conversations drift toward violence or conflict, they quickly change the subject. If presented with situations that might require their hidden skills, they find excuses to avoid involvement. This reluctance demonstrates their commitment to leaving the past behind and raises questions about what traumatic experiences might have led to such. Firm boundaries. The narrative must also introduce secondary characters who know the protagonist only as their current identity. These relationships have been built on partial truths, with the protagonist carefully maintaining their cover through omission and misdirection. The authentic connections formed with these unknowing characters create both emotional complexity and potential conflict once the truth emerges. Will these relationships survive when the full identity is revealed? The uncertainty adds significant emotional stakes to the story. As the initial setup approaches completion, we begin to sense the fragility of the protagonist's carefully constructed world. Their peaceful existence depends entirely on remaining unrecognized and unthreatened. The narrative creates a growing sense of inevitability. This tranquil life cannot last. Something or someone from the past will eventually intrude, forcing the protagonist to confront what they've tried to leave behind. The arrival of the antagonists represents the catalyst that will ultimately shatter this carefully maintained facade. Their introduction begins subtly, perhaps through news reports of incidents connected to the protagonist's past, mysterious surveillance of the protagonist's home, or the unsettling sense of being watched. These early warning signs create mounting tension as the audience recognizes the threat before the protagonist acknowledges it. The antagonists themselves must be established as genuinely dangerous, but initially unaware of who they're truly dealing with. Their confidence stems from misconceptions. They see only the harmless identity the protagonist projects, not the lethal capability beneath. This miscalculation creates dramatic irony, as the audience, having picked up the breadcrumbs about the protagonist's true nature, anticipates the violent correction that will follow when boundaries are crossed. The antagonist's motivations connect directly to the protagonist, though they may not initially realize it. Perhaps they're former enemies seeking revenge, criminal operations expanding into territory the protagonist now considers home. Or they're targeting someone the protagonist cares about. Whatever their purpose, their actions will inevitably force the protagonist to choose between maintaining their cover or employing their hidden skills to neutralize the threat. As the setup reaches its conclusion, the narrative establishes clear stakes. We understand what the protagonist values, what they stand to lose, and what awakening their former self might cost them psychologically and relationally. We recognize that once certain lines are crossed, there's no going back to the peaceful existence they've cultivated. Their two worlds, past and present, are about to collide with violent consequences. The final moments of this setup phase create a sense of impending confrontation. The antagonists move closer, their threat becoming more explicit The protagonist begins to recognize signs that their peaceful existence is in jeopardy. Secondary characters remain blissfully unaware of the danger, creating vulnerability that the protagonist cannot ignore. All elements are now in place for the dramatic shift that will occur when the protagonist's true identity is finally revealed. Through decisive, violent action, this carefully constructed setup, balancing mundane normalcy with hints of extraordinary capability, creates the perfect foundation for the shocking revelation to come. By thoroughly establishing what appears to be reality, the narrative ensures maximum impact when that reality is suddenly and violently overturned. The greater the contrast between perceived weakness and actual strength, the more powerful the moment of revelation becomes. The antagonists move with practiced precision, unaware they're stepping into a trap of their own making. Their intelligence appears solid. They've identified a target, assessed the apparent lack of security, and developed what seems to be an overwhelmingly advantageous approach. Maps are studied, surveillance photos examined, and tactical positions assigned with professional efficiency. They speak confidently about the simplicity of the operation, perhaps even joking about how straightforward this particular job will be. Their overconfidence is palpable, creating dramatic irony as the audience recognizes the fatal miscalculation unfolding before their eyes. The leader of these antagonists serves as the embodiment of this misplaced certainty. They brief their team with absolute assurance, emphasizing the target's perceived vulnerabilities. Just a teacher, only a housewife, nothing but a small business owner. This dismissive language establishes both the antagonist's arrogance and their fundamental misunderstanding of who they're about to confront. The leader may even explicitly warn against overestimating the target, ironically highlighting their own critical underestimation in the process. As the antagonists approach the protagonist's domain, the narrative introduces a crucial point of no return. These forces of disruption have now fully committed to their course of action. They've crossed a boundary, both literal and metaphorical, that will necessitate the protagonist's response. The physical intrusion into the protagonist's territory symbolizes the violation of the peace they've carefully constructed, making conflict inevitable. Each step the antagonists take toward their objective ratchets the tension higher, creating a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. The antagonists' motivations must be clearly established during this phase. Their objectives may be mundane, money, territory, power, but the personal significance to the protagonist transforms these generic goals into specific threats. Perhaps they seek to control something the protagonist values, eliminate someone the protagonist protects, or simply establish dominance in an area the protagonist considers home. Understanding precisely what they want creates clarity about what's at stake and why peaceful resolution is impossible. This phase often introduces the hierarchical structure of the antagonist organization. We see not just the immediate threat, but glimpses of the larger power structure behind it. Lower-level operatives take direct action, while more significant figures remain in the background, directing operations from a position of safety. This layered opposition creates depth to the conflict and establishes that defeating the immediate threat will likely trigger escalation from more dangerous elements within the antagonist organization. The protagonist isn't just dealing with isolated adversaries, but potentially awakening a much larger enemy. The antagonist's approach reveals their methodology and capabilities. We observe their tactics, their equipment, their level of training and coordination. They might utilize surveillance, technology, demonstrate specialized skills, or employ specific weapons that indicate their level of professionalism and threat. These details establish them as formidable opponents, not easily defeated, which in turn heightens the stakes and suggests the extraordinary capabilities the protagonist must possess to overcome them. Critical to this phase is the contrast between what the antagonists believe about their target and what the audience has been led to understand. The antagonists see only the surface identity, the carefully constructed persona the protagonist presents to the world. They've entirely missed or dismissed the subtle indicators that would warn them of the danger they're approaching. This dramatic irony, where the audience understands something the characters do not, creates anticipation for the moment when this misconception will be violently corrected. The narrative often intercuts between the antagonist's approach and the protagonist's continuing normal activities, unaware of the imminent threat. This parallel storytelling heightens tension by explicitly showing the collision course between these opposing forces. We might see the protagonist engaged in mundane tasks, preparing dinner, helping children with homework, closing up their shop, while simultaneously watching the antagonists arm themselves, check communications equipment, and move into position. These contrasting visuals powerfully illustrate the impending disruption of the protagonist's peaceful existence. As the threat draws closer, the narrative may introduce subtle indications that the protagonist senses something amiss. Years of training and experience have honed instincts that can't be entirely suppressed. Perhaps they notice unusual vehicles in the neighborhood, sense they're being watched, or simply experience a growing uneasiness they can't immediately explain. These moments suggest that beneath the ordinary exterior, their heightened awareness remains active, even if deliberately ignored. Secondary characters often serve as foils during this phase, their complete obliviousness to the approaching danger highlighting the protagonist's growing tension. A spouse might comment on the protagonist seeming distracted, children might continue playing without concern, or colleagues might chat about mundane matters while the protagonist's attention shifts to potential threats. These interactions emphasize the isolation of the protagonist. They alone recognize the signs of danger, creating an internal conflict about whether to alert others and potentially expose their past. The antagonists often take preliminary actions that foreshadow their ultimate objective. They might neutralize potential interference, cutting phone lines, disabling security systems, or isolating the target location. They could establish positions that control potential escape routes or deploy surveillance to monitor for unexpected complications. These preparatory steps demonstrate their thoroughness and professionalism while simultaneously increasing the protagonist's vulnerability, making their eventual counteraction all the more impressive. Environmental factors frequently play a role. During the threat emergence phase, weather conditions, time of day, or physical characteristics of the location can amplify tension and influence the developing scenario. An approaching storm might mirror the building conflict. Nightfall could provide concealment for the antagonist's approach, or the isolated nature of the setting might emphasize the protagonist's vulnerability. These elements contribute to the atmosphere of impending confrontation while potentially providing tactical advantages or disadvantages to both sides. This phase often incorporates clock-ticking elements that create a sense of inevitability and compression of time. The antagonists might reference specific deadlines or time frames. We move at midnight, or be in position in 5 minutes. These explicit timelines establish the imminent nature of the threat, while creating a countdown effect that drives the narrative forward with increasing momentum. Each passing moment brings the confrontation closer, allowing no opportunity for the protagonist to escape what's coming. The threat emergence phase frequently includes moments where the antagonists could potentially abort their mission. Crossroads, where they might recognize warning signs or reconsider their approach. Perhaps they notice unusual security measures, encounter unexpected complications, or simply sense something doesn't align with their intelligence. These moments of potential recognition, which ultimately go unheeded, reinforce their fatal overconfidence, while suggesting they had opportunities to avoid the consequences awaiting them. As the antagonists finalize their approach, the narrative often reveals their specific plan of attack. We learn how they intend to overcome any perceived obstacles, neutralize potential resistance, and achieve their objective. This explicit outlining of their strategy creates dramatic tension as the audience anticipates how these carefully laid plans will collapse when confronted with the protagonist's hidden capabilities. The more detailed and seemingly comprehensive their plan appears, the more spectacular its eventual failure will be. The threat emergence phase culminates with the antagonists achieving their initial objective, making direct contact with the protagonist or breaching their sanctuary. This moment represents the point of no return, where conflict becomes unavoidable and the protagonist must respond. The antagonists believe they've secured their advantage and established dominance, perhaps explicitly demonstrating their perceived power over the seemingly vulnerable protagonist. Their apparent victory in this moment makes the coming reversal all the more dramatic. This phase concludes with the antagonists directly threatening what the protagonist values most: their family, their new identity, their peace. This explicit threat serves as the catalyst that will force the protagonist to abandon their carefully maintained cover and reveal their true nature. The moment often includes a beat of silence, a final pause before the protagonist makes the decision that will irrevocably change everything. In this suspended moment, we see the protagonist's internal struggle, the reluctance to return to violence weighed against the necessity of protecting what they love. The protagonist stands before the antagonists, shoulders slightly hunched, voice trembling, eyes downcast, the perfect picture of submission and fear. This carefully constructed display of weakness represents a masterful performance, one the protagonist has likely perfected through years of concealing their true nature. Every element of their body language communicates vulnerability: hands that shake slightly, a nervous swallow, perhaps even a pleading tone as they ask what the intruders want. The antagonists perceive exactly what they expect to see: an ordinary person overwhelmed by sudden violence and the threat of harm. This false vulnerability creates a moment of maximum dramatic tension, as the audience now possesses knowledge that the antagonists do not. The viewers understand that beneath this veneer of helplessness lies lethal capability, creating a suspended moment where two realities exist simultaneously. The protagonist appears defeated while actually assessing the situation with clinical precision, counting opponents, noting weapons, calculating angles of attack, and identifying environmental elements that might provide tactical advantage. This duality, apparent submission masking strategic preparation, forms the psychological core of this narrative phase. The antagonists typically respond to this displayed weakness with increasing confidence and cruelty. Believing they've established dominance, they may become more explicit in their threats, more casual in their violence, or more dismissive in their treatment of the protagonist. Perhaps they mock the protagonist's apparent fear, comment derisively on their ordinary life, or speak openly about their intentions, believing their target poses no threat and requires no operational security. This escalating arrogance deepens their vulnerability, while simultaneously justifying the violent response that will soon follow. During this phase, the protagonist often attempts one final diplomatic resolution. Despite knowing violence is inevitable, they may offer compliance, suggest compromise, or appeal to the antagonist's better nature. This represents not merely a continuation of their cover, but a genuine reluctance to revert to their former self. The protagonist has worked diligently to leave violence behind, and this last peaceful overture, which the antagonists invariably reject, serves both to justify what follows and to emphasize the protagonist's character development. They no longer resort to violence as a first option, but as a last necessary resort. The false vulnerability phase frequently includes moments where the protagonist must silently communicate with loved ones or allies who share the dangerous situation. These subtle exchanges, a meaningful glance, a nearly imperceptible nod, a code word or phrase, suggest coordination beneath the apparent capitulation. Secondary characters who know nothing of the protagonist's capabilities might interpret these signals as expressions of fear or resignation, while those who understand the protagonist's true nature recognize them as preparation for action. These layered communications add complexity to the scene while building anticipation for the coming revelation. This phase often incorporates a hostage situation dynamic, where antagonists threaten someone the protagonist cares about, a spouse, child, friend, or innocent bystander. This threat against a loved one serves multiple narrative functions. It justifies the protagonist's initial compliance. It establishes the antagonist's moral bankruptcy, and most importantly, it provides motivation for the protagonist's imminent, violent response. The audience understands that while the protagonist might endure personal danger, threat to those they protect crosses an unforgivable line that necessitates action. The physical positioning during this phase is critically important to the developing scene. The antagonists typically surround the protagonist, creating an apparent tactical advantage through superior numbers and positioning. They might physically manhandle the protagonist, forcing them into a submissive posture or restraining them in ways that appear to eliminate any possibility of resistance. These physical arrangements, designed to communicate the protagonist's helplessness, ironically often place the antagonists in perfect positions for the protagonist to neutralize them efficiently once action begins. Environmental elements play a significant role during the false vulnerability phase. The protagonist constantly scans for weapons of opportunity, defensive positions, or strategic advantages within their surroundings. Objects that appear mundane to both antagonists and audience, kitchen implements, tools, furniture, take on potential deadly significance through the protagonist's tactical assessment. The setting itself becomes a loaded gun, with the protagonist mentally cataloging how ordinary items might be transformed into lethal instruments when necessary. This phase frequently incorporates moments where the protagonist must endure physical intimidation or actual violence while maintaining their vulnerable facade. Perhaps an antagonist strikes them and they fall more dramatically than necessary, while using the movement to position themselves more advantageously. They might absorb a painful grip on their arm while using the contact to better gauge an opponent's strength and reaction time. These moments where the protagonist endures abuse serve to both heighten audience tension and justify the disproportionate response that will follow. The false vulnerability phase often includes a pivotal moment where the antagonists directly threaten what the protagonist values most, not just physically, but symbolically. They might desecrate the protagonist's home, destroy meaningful possessions, or verbally demean the life the protagonist has built. These actions strike at the protagonist's core identity and newly constructed life, making clear that the antagonists threaten not just physical safety, but everything the protagonist has worked to achieve since leaving their violent past behind. This comprehensive threat ensures the audience understands that the protagonist has no choice but to respond. Secondary characters play crucial roles during this phase, their genuine fear and confusion providing stark contrast to the protagonist's controlled performance. A spouse might plead desperately with the antagonists, children might cry in terror, or colleagues might attempt futile resistance, all while the protagonist maintains a calculated stillness. These authentic responses emphasize both the real danger of the situation and the extraordinary self-control the protagonist exercises by not immediately revealing their capabilities. The secondary character's genuine vulnerability highlights the protagonist's false vulnerability through contrast. The antagonists often disclose critical information during this phase, believing the protagonist poses no threat and will soon be neutralized. They might reveal aspects of their larger organization, details about their operations, or elements of their future plans. This intelligence, delivered directly to someone they fail to recognize as their most dangerous enemy, will ultimately contribute to their destruction. The irony of providing tactical information to a seemingly helpless victim who will use it against them adds another layer to the dramatic tension. The protagonist frequently employs subtle psychological tactics during this phase, manipulating the antagonist's perceptions even while appearing submissive. They might intentionally appear more frightened than necessary to encourage overconfidence, ask seemingly innocent questions that reveal operational details, or deliberately position themselves to maximize tactical advantage once action begins. These psychological maneuvers demonstrate that the protagonist's most dangerous weapon isn't physical prowess, but the strategic intelligence that guides its application. Time seems to stretch during the false vulnerability phase, with the narrative often employing techniques that create a suspended moment before violence erupts. The protagonist's heightened awareness might be represented through altered perception, sounds becoming more distinct, visual details sharpening, movements appearing slightly slowed. This sensory manipulation suggests the protagonist entering a different mental state, transitioning from civilian identity to combatant mindset while externally maintaining their harmless appearance. The audience experiences this pause as the calm before an inevitable storm. Throughout this phase, the protagonist engages in constant risk calculation, weighing various triggers that might necessitate action. They might temporarily accept certain threats, but recognize specific red lines that once crossed will force their response. Perhaps they endure personal danger, but will act immediately if weapons are drawn against family members. Maybe they tolerate verbal intimidation, but will respond to physical assault. These internal thresholds remain invisible to antagonists while creating a psychological countdown for the audience. A sense that the protagonist has established conditions under which their true nature will emerge. The false vulnerability phase builds toward a singular trigger point, the moment when circumstances force the protagonist to abandon pretense and reveal their capabilities. This trigger typically involves an escalation by the antagonists that makes continued passivity impossible. Perhaps they move to harm a loved one, begin to implement an irreversible violent action, or create a now or never tactical situation. This trigger moment, after the sustained tension of false vulnerability, serves as the narrative's explosive detonation point, releasing the accumulated pressure of the protagonist's restraint. As this phase reaches its conclusion, subtle indicators that the performance is ending often appear. The protagonist's demeanor might shift almost imperceptibly, a straightening of posture, a clearing of expression, eyes suddenly focusing with predatory intensity. These minute changes, unnoticed by the antagonists but visible to the audience, signal the imminent transition. The false vulnerability falls away like a shed skin, revealing the deadly capability that has been present all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the inevitable moment when peace is no longer an option. The transformation begins with a single, decisive movement, a blur of action that shatters the protagonist's carefully maintained facade. Where moments before stood a seemingly vulnerable target, now emerges a lethal operative, moving with mechanical precision. The shift is instantaneous and shocking, like a switch flipped or a mask dropped to reveal the steel beneath. This moment of revelation represents the narrative's first climactic peak, the fulcrum upon which the entire story pivots. Everything that came before was misdirection. Everything that follows is consequence. The antagonist's reactions to this sudden metamorphosis follow a predictable psychological progression. Initial confusion gives way to disbelief, followed quickly by the dawning realization of their catastrophic miscalculation. Their expressions transform from contemptuous confidence to stunned incomprehension as they struggle to reconcile the apparent victim with the efficient predator, now systematically dismantling their advantage. This cognitive dissonance momentarily paralyzes them, creating a critical window where the protagonist can seize tactical control before organized resistance forms. The protagonist's first strikes are calculated for maximum psychological impact as well as tactical advantage. They target the most immediate threats with ruthless efficiency, neutralizing the most dangerous opponents before moving to secondary targets. Their movements possess an economy and precision that communicates years of specialized training, a controlled violence that stands in stark contrast to the chaotic aggression of the antagonists. Each action serves a specific purpose in the rapidly developing sequence, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next with practiced fluidity. Secondary, characters witness this transformation with their own shock and disbelief. A spouse, friend, or colleague who knew nothing of the protagonist's past capabilities now observes a stranger wearing familiar features, performing actions they never imagined possible. Their reactions, ranging from stunned silence to audible gasps, serve as proxies for the audience's own astonishment, even as viewers have been primed to anticipate this revelation. These witnesses become crucial viewpoint characters, processing in real time the implications of discovering that someone they thought they knew completely has concealed such extraordinary capabilities. The physical environment transforms during this phase from a place of vulnerability to a field of tactical advantage. Objects that seemed innocuous become weapons in the protagonist's hands. Architectural features that appeared to trap them now provide strategic opportunities. The protagonist navigates the space with intimate familiarity, using their knowledge of the terrain to maximum advantage. This mastery of environment further emphasizes the disparity between appearance and reality. The protagonist hasn't just concealed their skills, but has been continuously analyzing their surroundings for combat potential throughout their seemingly ordinary existence. The protagonist's fighting style often reveals specific aspects of their background and training. The precise nature of their movements, whether they employ military close-quarters combat techniques, specialized martial arts, intelligence agency methodologies, or criminal fighting tactics, provides clues about their former life. These stylistic elements tell a story without exposition, suggesting not just that the protagonist has a hidden past, but hinting at its specific nature. Viewers can begin inferring what organizations they might have belonged to, what operations they might have conducted, and what experiences shaped their capabilities. Sound design plays a crucial role during this transformation sequence. The protagonists' attacks often carry auditory signatures that emphasize their lethality. The sharp crack of breaking bone, the wet impact of devastating strikes, the metallic whisper of a blade. These sounds create a sensory counterpoint to the visual action, reinforcing the sudden shift from apparent vulnerability to overwhelming violence. The protagonists themselves often remains eerily silent during initial combat, their quiet efficiency contrasting with the antagonist's shouted confusion and pain, further emphasizing the control differential that has suddenly emerged. Time perception significantly alters during the identity revelation phase. While the false vulnerability segment stretched moments into extended tension, the initial combat sequence often employs the opposite technique, compressing significant action into a shockingly brief time frame. Antagonists who believed they held overwhelming advantage find themselves neutralized in seconds, their numerical superiority rendered meaningless by the protagonist's speed and precision. This temporal compression communicates the vast skill disparity that was hidden beneath the ordinary facade, showing just how completely the antagonists misjudged the situation. The protagonist's expression undergoes subtle but significant transformation during this phase. Their features, which previously communicated fear or submission, reconfigure into something altogether different, not necessarily rage or battle fury, but often a cold calculation more unsettling than any emotional display. This expressional shift might include micro-changes: eyes that suddenly focus with predatory intensity, jaw muscles that set with determination, posture that transforms from defensive curl to balanced readiness. These subtle physical tells communicate that the protagonist hasn't just revealed hidden skills, but has accessed an entirely different personality configuration, perhaps their true self emerging after prolonged suppression. The revelation phase, frequently includes a pivotal moment where the protagonist uses the antagonist's own weapons against them. Perhaps they disarm an attacker and employ their gun with unexpected proficiency, or redirect a knife thrust with practiced ease before claiming the blade. This appropriation of the antagonist's instruments of violence serves multiple narrative functions. It demonstrates the protagonist's superior skill. It creates poetic justice in turning the attacker's advantages against them, and it visually represents the complete reversal of power that has occurred, the intended victim becoming the dominant force using the very tools meant for their subjugation. Dialogue during this phase often incorporates significant tonal shifts from the protagonist. Their speech patterns may transform completely, perhaps dropping an affected regional accent to reveal a more neutral delivery, abandoning submissive language for clipped command phrases, or switching to another language entirely. These verbal transformations parallel the physical metamorphosis, suggesting that everything about their previous presentation, from movement to speech, was part of a comprehensive constructed identity now being shed as necessary. A single line delivered in this new voice can effectively communicate that they're accessing a self they've kept hidden from everyone around them. The identity revelation typically incorporates specific visual motifs that symbolize the protagonist's transformation. Perhaps they physically cast aside an element of their civilian disguise, removing glasses, tearing restrictive clothing, pulling back hair that obscured their vision. These visual signifiers create a ceremonial aspect to the transformation, symbolizing the protagonist's decision to abandon pretense. The discarded elements represent their civilian life being temporarily set aside as they access their true capabilities. A visual shorthand for a psychological transition from peaceful existence to combat mentality. This phase often includes a brief pause after the initial shocking display of violence, a moment where the protagonist stands amid neutralized opponents while remaining antagonists reassess their approach. This suspended moment allows both characters and audience to process the paradigm shift that has occurred. The protagonist might deliver a warning during this pause, offering remaining antagonists the opportunity to retreat, a mercy that demonstrates both their strategic confidence and lingering humanity. This momentary ceasefire creates rhythm within the action sequence, while emphasizing that the power dynamics have completely reversed. The antagonist's tactical response to this revelation reveals their adaptability and true threat level. Less competent opponents panic, abandoning strategy for desperate aggression that makes them even more vulnerable to the protagonist's superior technique. More dangerous adversaries quickly reassess, adjusting their approach to account for the unexpected resistance. This adaptation distinguishes serious threats from mere obstacles and establishes whether the antagonists represent worthy challenges to the protagonist's abilities. Their capacity to recover from surprise indicates the level of difficulty the protagonist will face in the escalating conflict. As remaining antagonists begin to comprehend whom they're actually facing, their psychological responses diversify based on character. Some experience paralyzing fear, recognizing the hopelessness of their position. Others display desperate bravado, attempting to maintain confidence despite mounting evidence of their disadvantage. The most dangerous might exhibit calculating reassessment, already planning how to leverage this new information. These varied reactions create complexity within the opposition force, while providing opportunities for the narrative to distinguish between different threat levels among the antagonists. The identity revelation phase often concludes with the protagonist delivering a signature move or technique that serves as an exclamation point to their transformation. This might be a particularly difficult combat maneuver, a specialized kill technique, or an approach that requires such specific training that it identifies their background. This flourish serves as both character development and plot advancement. It convinces remaining antagonists that they're dealing with a specific type of operative, while providing the audience with another clue about the protagonist's concealed past. The signature technique becomes a calling card that will identify the protagonist to knowledgeable observers throughout the narrative. Throughout this phase, the protagonist maintains tactical awareness that extends beyond immediate combat. While neutralizing current threats, they simultaneously secure exits, protect vulnerable allies, and prepare for potential reinforcements. This multi-layered situational management demonstrates that they're not merely a skilled fighter, but a strategic operative, accustomed to complex hostile scenarios. Their ability to process and respond to multiple factors simultaneously reveals a mind trained for combat operations, an intelligence as dangerous as their physical capabilities, and equally concealed beneath their ordinary facade until necessity revealed it. The immediate threat neutralized, the protagonist stands amid the aftermath of their sudden, violent revelation. Bodies lie incapacitated or dead. The physical space bears witness to the violence. Upturned furniture, shattered glass, splattered blood. This moment of temporary calm allows both protagonist and audience to process what has occurred. The irrevocable crossing of a threshold. The peaceful identity the protagonist had constructed lies in ruins alongside the antagonists who forced this transformation. A sense of finality permeates the scene. This decisive action cannot be undone, and its consequences will inevitably cascade forward. Secondary characters now confront the reality of who the protagonist truly is. The spouse, friend, or colleague who witnessed the transformation processes their shock, asking questions with trembling voice or simply staring in disbelief. "Who are you?" they might ask, or more pointedly, "What are you?" This moment of reckoning forces the protagonist to acknowledge their deception while beginning to reconcile their compartmentalized identities. Their response, whether evasive, apologetic, or matter-of-fact, reveals much about their character and relationship to their violent capabilities. Some might express remorse for the necessary violence, while others demonstrate a disturbing comfort with returning to their true nature. The protagonist quickly recognizes that the initial confrontation represents merely the opening move in a larger conflict. Their analytical mind has already begun calculating consequences, understanding that their decisive action against these antagonists will trigger responses from the larger organization. Structural awareness allows them to anticipate the escalation. In pattern, the next wave will be larger, better prepared, and specifically briefed on the protagonist's now revealed capabilities. The momentary victory has exposed them, making anonymity impossible and forcing a strategic pivot from defensive reaction to proactive planning. Physical evidence of the protagonist's specialized background often emerges during this phase. Perhaps wounds reveal old scars that tell stories of previous violence, Maybe they display medical knowledge in treating injuries that suggests battlefield experience. Their approach to securing the location, checking bodies, or collecting weapons demonstrates methodologies consistent with specific training backgrounds. These physical and behavioral tells provide contextual clues about their history without requiring explicit exposition, allowing the audience to piece together aspects of the protagonist's concealed past through observation rather than explanation. The protagonist typically engages in immediate tactical responses following the initial confrontation. They secure the location, ensure no antagonists survive to report back, or deliberately leave one alive to deliver a message, and begin preparing for inevitable reprisals. These actions might include gathering weapons from fallen enemies, creating impromptu defensive positions, treating any injuries, or preparing for evacuation. The methodical nature of these preparations contrasts with the chaos of the preceding violence, demonstrating that the protagonist's capabilities extend beyond mere fighting skill to strategic planning and operational foresight. Communication. Patterns often reveal additional layers of the protagonist's concealed identity during this phase. They might use specialized terminology that betrays military or intelligence background, employ unusual communication protocols when reaching out to potential allies, or demonstrate familiarity with covert operational procedures. Their language becomes more direct and precise, abandoning the casual speech patterns of their civilian cover for the economical clarity of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. This linguistic transformation further emphasizes that every aspect of their previous presentation was carefully constructed. The protagonist must address the immediate aftermath with secondary characters, particularly those closest to them who have just witnessed their transformation. This conversation often represents a crucial character moment as the protagonist decides how much truth to reveal. Some might offer full disclosure, recognizing that deception is no longer possible. Others might provide only enough information to facilitate immediate survival, maintaining operational security from habit. The most complex characters express the genuine conflict they feel between their desire for honesty and the protective instinct that led them to conceal their nature in the first place. This phase frequently introduces suggestions of a larger conspiracy or hidden agenda behind the initial attack. The protagonist might discover unexpected items among the antagonist's possessions, recognize insignia or tattoos that identify specific organizations, or realize the attacker's new details they shouldn't have been able to access. These discoveries transform what initially appeared to be a random attack or simple criminal activity into something more ominous, a targeted operation with specific objectives. This revelation escalates the stakes while providing narrative momentum toward uncovering the ultimate force behind the immediate threat. The protagonist often experiences physical or psychological reactions that betray their conflicted relationship with their revealed identity. Their hands might shake after the violence subsides, not from fear, but from adrenaline crash, or the disturbing realization of how naturally they return to lethal capability. They might demonstrate hypervigilance that appears excessive to civilians, but makes perfect sense to someone trained to anticipate threats. Some might express disgust at their own efficiency, while others display a troubling satisfaction at returning to their true nature. These reactions provide crucial character development, revealing the protagonist's complex relationship with their violent skills. Technical capabilities beyond direct combat often emerge during this phase. The protagonist might demonstrate expertise in communications technology, surveillance countermeasures, explosive devices, or medical procedures. They might access hidden caches of equipment or resources that reveal long-term contingency planning beneath their peaceful facade. These specialized skills suggest not just combat training, but comprehensive operational capabilities. The protagonist hasn't simply been hiding fighting ability, but an entire professional identity complete with technical expertise and resource networks. This expanded skill set transforms them from merely dangerous to comprehensively lethal. The antagonist organization's initial response typically arrives during this phase. Communications chatter, surveillance vehicles appearing in the area, or specific indicators the protagonist recognizes as preparation for a larger assault. These warning signs create mounting tension while demonstrating the protagonist's situational awareness. They can read patterns invisible to ordinary observers, recognizing the significance of apparently innocuous developments. This heightened perception illuminates another aspect of their specialized background, while establishing the accelerating timeline toward the next confrontation. The window for preparation narrows as the antagonists mobilize their response. Secondary characters must make crucial decisions during this phase, determining whether to stand with the protagonist despite their revealed deception. These decisions reveal much about these supporting characters while creating additional emotional complexity. Some might feel betrayed beyond reconciliation, unable to accept that someone they trusted completely has maintained such fundamental deception. Others demonstrate remarkable adaptability, processing their shock but choosing loyalty based on their history with the protagonist. The most interesting characters experience both reactions simultaneously, feeling genuine hurt at the deception, while recognizing the protagonist concealed their nature for understandable reasons. The environment itself often undergoes transformation during this phase as the protagonist begins converting their ordinary surroundings into a defensible position. They might move furniture to create cover, identify and secure potential entry points, or repurpose household items into improvised weapons or security systems. This environmental manipulation demonstrates their ability to adapt any setting to tactical advantage while visually representing the transformation of their peaceful life into a battleground. The conversion of domestic space into fortified position symbolizes the larger transformation of the protagonist's identity from civilian to operative. The protagonist frequently undergoes a physical transformation to match their psychological shift. They might change from civilian clothing into more tactical attire, remove items that restricted movement, or retrieve hidden weapons and equipment. This visual metamorphosis completes the transition from their constructed ordinary identity to their authentic combatant self. The wardrobe change serves practical purposes while functioning as visual shorthand for the protagonist's psychological recommitment to their true capabilities. The physical transformation often occurs with ritualistic precision, suggesting a process they've mentally rehearsed despite hoping never to implement it. Strategic thinking becomes increasingly evident as the protagonist transitions from reactive defense to proactive planning. They begin anticipating the antagonist's likely approaches, considering potential vulnerabilities and developing countermeasures for various scenarios. This shift from immediate tactical response to operational strategy reveals another dimension of their training, not just the ability to win individual confrontations, but to conceptualize and control the larger conflict. This strategic awareness often manifests through explicit planning sessions, where the protagonist outlines potential enemy actions and appropriate responses, demonstrating a mind trained to think several moves ahead in lethal chess. The stakes escalate dramatically as the protagonist realizes the antagonists now possess crucial information about them. Their concealed identity has been compromised, their sanctuary located, their capabilities revealed. This exposure transforms the conflict from an isolated incident into an existential threat. The antagonists now know exactly who to target, where to find them, and what they're capable of, though they likely still underestimate the protagonist's full potential. This escalation forces the protagonist to accept that they cannot return to their previous life. They must either eliminate the threat completely or abandon everything they've built and disappear once again. The narrative often introduces the first hints of the protagonist's specific background during this phase, usually through recognition by knowledgeable antagonists. Perhaps a surviving attacker reports back to superiors, identifying the protagonist's combat style or signature techniques. Maybe the antagonist leadership reviews surveillance footage and recognizes operational patterns associated with specific organizations or training programs. These moments of recognition elevate the threat level while providing context for the protagonist's extraordinary capabilities. The antagonist's reaction to this identification, whether fear, excitement, or intensified determination, establishes how the conflict will develop. The moment for truth has arrived. Having demonstrated their extraordinary capabilities through action, the protagonist now faces the necessity of explaining who they truly are. This revelation typically occurs in a moment of relative calm following the initial conflict, a temporary sanctuary where urgent survival concerns have been addressed, but before the next wave of danger arrives. The setting often carries symbolic weight. Perhaps the protagonist unlocks a hidden compartment in their home, revealing equipment and documents that testify to their concealed past. Or maybe they retreat to a location that holds significance to their former life. This physical transition mirrors the psychological journey from concealment to disclosure. The protagonist's explanation of their past identity frequently begins with reluctance. Years of operational security and the habit of concealment don't dissolve easily, even when circumstances demand transparency. Their initial revelations often emerge fragmented and defensive, offered only because necessity compels disclosure. This hesitation isn't merely dramatic device, but character-consistent behavior. Someone trained to safeguard their identity wouldn't suddenly become forthcoming merely because their cover is compromised. The protagonists struggle to articulate. Their history becomes a character moment, revealing both their commitment to their former profession and their genuine desire to leave it behind. Secondary characters serve as crucial audience surrogates during this revelation, asking questions viewers themselves would pose. Who trained you? How many people have you killed? Why did you leave that life? These inquiries guide the exposition while creating emotionally charged interactions as loved ones struggle to reconcile the person they thought they knew with this newly revealed identity. Their reactions, ranging from fascination to horror to betrayal, provide emotional texture to the disclosure while emphasizing the magnitude of the protagonist's deception. The most complex narratives allow these secondary characters their own processing journey, rather than immediate acceptance or rejection. The protagonist's origin story typically reveals motivations that humanize their exceptional abilities. Perhaps they were recruited young from difficult circumstances, offering limited choices. Maybe idealism initially drove them to serve a cause they believed righteous, only to become disillusioned by organizational corruption. Some might have been born into their specialized world, raised by parents already embedded in clandestine operations. These backstories provide context for the protagonist's skills while generating sympathy for their attempt to escape that life. This humanization transforms them from simply a weapon to a person who carries the burden of exceptional capability. The revelation often includes specific events that drove the protagonist to abandon their former identity. A mission gone catastrophically wrong, betrayal by trusted colleagues, growing ethical concerns about their assignments, or personal tragedy resulting from their profession frequently serve as turning points. These pivotal moments reveal character and establish stakes. The protagonist hasn't merely chosen a quiet life, but actively fled circumstances that threatened their survival or compromised their moral framework. This history explains not just why they possess extraordinary skills, but why they've gone to such lengths to conceal them. Technical details about the protagonist's training often emerge during this disclosure phase. We learn specific organizations or units they belong to, specialized programs they completed, or particular methodologies they mastered. These details ground their seemingly superhuman abilities in recognized frameworks: military special forces, intelligence agencies, criminal organizations, or clandestine operations groups. The specificity adds verisimilitude while hinting at the protagonist's particular skill set and operational approach. Their background might emphasize stealth and precision, overwhelming force, psychological manipulation, or technological expertise, each suggesting different capabilities and limitations. The revelation frequently includes discussion of other operatives still active within the protagonist's former world, colleagues, rivals, mentors, or enemies who might recognize them or become involved in the current conflict. These connections establish that the protagonist's past isn't merely history, but a living network that can be activated, either as resource or threat. Some of these individuals might become potential allies in the current struggle, while others represent additional dangers should they learn of the protagonist's re-emergence. This expansion of the narrative universe creates additional tension while suggesting future complications beyond the immediate antagonists. The protagonist often reveals contingency preparations that demonstrate they never fully believed their escape was permanent. Perhaps they've maintained emergency caches, retained contact with trusted former associates, or established evacuation protocols should their cover be compromised. These preparations reveal a psychological state more complex than their peaceful facade suggested. Beneath their apparent integration into ordinary life lay persistent vigilance and anticipation of danger. This dual existence emphasizes both their commitment to their new life and their inability to fully trust in its permanence, creating a character perpetually caught between worlds. Physical evidence often accompanies verbal revelation during this phase. The protagonist might display specialized equipment, official documentation, medals or commendations, photographs from their former life, or scars with stories attached. These tangible artifacts provide concrete validation of their extraordinary claims while offering visual storytelling opportunities. Each object potentially carries emotional significance. Perhaps a medal represents an operation that caused them particular moral conflict, or a photograph depicts colleagues who didn't survive. These physical connections to their past create emotional resonance while confirming the reality of their disclosure. The revelation frequently introduces specialized terminology and jargon that further authenticates the protagonist's background. They might reference classified operations by their code names, describe tactical procedures using professional shorthand, or employ organizational terminology unfamiliar to civilians. This specialized language serves multiple narrative functions. It establishes the protagonist's legitimate insider status. It creates opportunities for secondary characters to request clarification, allowing natural exposition, and it begins building the particular vocabulary of the narrative world. The protagonist's fluency in this language confirms their identity as effectively as their physical capabilities. The disclosure often reveals the protagonist's specific rank, position, or status within their former organization. Perhaps they were an elite operative with specialized designation, a high-ranking officer with strategic responsibilities, or an agent with particular classified clearance. This specificity establishes not just that they were part of a specialized world, but that they held significant position within it, information that contextualizes both their exceptional abilities and the resources that might be deployed against them. Their former status often explains why their re-emergence creates particularly serious concern among those who recognize their capabilities. The unveiling frequently addresses the legitimate question of why someone with such extraordinary training would choose to abandon that identity for an ordinary existence. The protagonist's explanation reveals core values and psychological development. Perhaps they grew weary of violence, began questioning the morality of their assignments, desired human connection impossible within their former life, or simply sought peace after years of constant danger. This motivation humanizes them while establishing what they value about their constructed ordinary life, creating stakes for the current conflict beyond mere survival. The potential loss of this hard-won peace becomes as significant as physical danger. The revelation often includes discussion of how the protagonist constructed their new identity, the specific steps they took to disappear, the resources they utilized, and the ongoing vigilance required to maintain their cover. These operational details demonstrate both their thoroughness and the significance of their decision to abandon their former life. Someone doesn't engage in such comprehensive identity alteration without powerful motivation. The extreme measures taken to ensure their disappearance emphasize the seriousness of their break with their past, while suggesting the difficulty antagonists would have encountered them without some additional factor bringing them to attention. The past unveiled often includes connections to the current antagonists, revealing the conflict isn't random, but directly related to the protagonist's concealed history. Perhaps the antagonists belong to an organization the protagonist once targeted. They're seeking revenge for specific operations, or they've discovered the protagonist possesses information threatening their current objectives. This connection transforms what initially appeared to be unfortunate coincidence into inevitable collision, suggesting the protagonist never truly escaped their past, but merely postponed reckoning with its consequences. This revelation often triggers the protagonist's realization that they cannot achieve resolution through retreat or negotiation, but must confront their history directly. The disclosure frequently reveals the psychological cost of the protagonist's former profession. They might describe difficulty sleeping, hypervigilance that never fully subsides, moral injury from particular assignments, or the isolation resulting from perpetual deception. These psychological impacts humanize the protagonist while explaining certain behaviors previously presented as personality quirks. What secondary characters interpreted as social awkwardness becomes revealed as operational caution. Apparent paranoia transforms into justified vigilance based on lived experience. This psychological dimension adds depth to the character while generating sympathy for both their past circumstances and current predicament. The revelation often includes discussion of the protagonist's specialized equipment or resources, either those they surrendered when leaving their former life or items they've maintained despite their attempted retirement. These might include custom weapons, communication devices, falsified documentation, specialized vehicles, or access to restricted information networks. The protagonist might reveal caches of such equipment maintained for contingency purposes, despite their hope never to require them. These resource revelations expand understanding of their capabilities while potentially introducing tools they'll utilize in the escalating conflict, setting expectations for future operational approaches. The unveiling typically includes moments where the protagonist demonstrates knowledge that validates their claimed background, perhaps describing classified events with insider detail, revealing awareness of non-public political realities, or displaying familiarity with covert operations impossible for ordinary citizens to know. These knowledge demonstrations authenticate their revelations while potentially introducing plot elements relevant to the current conflict. Information they possess from their former life often proves crucial to understanding the true nature of the present threat, transforming them from merely a combatant into a key intelligence resource in the developing situation. The protagonist transforms from reactive defender to strategic planner, their entire demeanor shifting as they access operational mindsets long suppressed. Where moments before they might have appeared ordinary, a parent, teacher, or shopkeeper, now they move with the focused precision of a professional preparing for combat operations. This transition manifests physically through altered posture, more economical movements, and an intensity of focus that renders them almost unrecognizable to those who knew only their civilian persona. The facade of normalcy has been completely abandoned, replaced by the authentic operator beneath. Methodical assessment of available resources becomes the protagonist's first priority. They inventory weapons, ammunition, communications equipment, medical supplies, and other tactical necessities, mentally cataloging what they have versus what they need. This inventory often reveals previously concealed caches or hidden compartments, containing specialized equipment maintained for contingencies despite their hope never to use them. These discoveries further illustrate the protagonist's perpetual preparedness beneath their peaceful exterior and provide concrete tools that will feature in upcoming confrontations. Environmental analysis follows as the protagonist evaluates their immediate surroundings with strategic precision. Ordinary locations transform under their tactical gaze. A family home becomes a defensive position with identified fields of fire, vulnerable access points, and potential fallback locations. A neighborhood reveals evacuation routes, choke points, and surveillance vulnerabilities. This specialized perspective highlights how differently they perceive the world compared to civilians, their everyday environment constantly assessed for tactical advantage, even during their supposed retirement. The protagonist begins developing multi-layered contingency plans, demonstrating a mind trained to anticipate various threat scenarios. These plans might include primary defensive strategies, secondary evacuation protocols, tertiary rally points, and communication procedures if the group becomes separated. This level of operational planning reveals their professional background as effectively as their combat skills, showcasing the strategic thinking that separates elite operatives from mere combatants. Each contingency builds upon potential failure points of previous plans, creating comprehensive preparation for numerous scenarios. Secondary characters often struggle to adapt to this new operational reality, finding themselves suddenly subject to tactical directives from someone they previously knew in entirely different contexts. The spouse accustomed to partnership now receives commands from a combat professional. Children familiar with a nurturing parent now witness a strategic commander issuing orders with expectation of immediate compliance. These interactions create tension while forcing secondary characters to reconcile conflicting images of the protagonist, the person they knew versus the operative now revealed. The preparation phase frequently includes scenes where the protagonist transforms civilian items into tactical resources. Household chemicals become explosive components. Kitchen knives are repurposed as combat implements. Clothing is modified for concealed weapon access, or everyday electronics are converted to surveillance equipment. These improvisations reveal both technical knowledge and adaptability, demonstrating that the protagonist's capabilities extend beyond formal training to innovative problem-solving. Their ability to weaponize ordinary environments highlights why they're particularly dangerous compared to conventional operatives dependent on standard equipment. If allies exist who understand the protagonist's true nature, this phase often involves reunion with these individuals after prolonged separation. Perhaps a former colleague arrives bringing additional resources, or the protagonist reaches out to contacts maintained despite their supposed retirement. These interactions typically include tension reflecting past complications or unresolved issues, suggesting the protagonist's break with their former life wasn't entirely clean. Conversations with these allies often include professional shorthand and inside references that highlight the specialized world the protagonist once inhabited, while excluding secondary characters who can't follow such exchanges. Training sequences may emerge during this phase as the protagonist prepares secondary characters for the coming conflict. The civilian spouse receives crash course instruction in weapons handling, children learn emergency protocols, or colleagues are briefed on communication procedures. These moments reveal the protagonist as teacher as well as operator, patiently translating their specialized knowledge into understandable directives for non-professionals. The contrast between their calm, instructional manner and the lethal capabilities being taught creates tension while demonstrating their ability to bridge their dual identities. Technological preparation often features prominently as the protagonist employs specialized equipment or systems. They might access dormant surveillance networks, activate emergency communication protocols, or utilize identification systems tied to their former operational life. These technological elements frequently reveal ongoing connections to their past, perhaps maintaining backdoor access to official systems they officially left years ago, or preserving authentication credentials that should have been surrendered. These technological resources expand their capabilities beyond individual combat skills to include institutional support, even if accessed unofficially. Psychological preparation becomes crucial as the protagonist mentally transitions from civilian to operative. This might include meditation techniques for combat focus, compartmentalization methods for managing fear, or centering exercises before operational deployment. These mental preparations reveal their specialized training extends beyond physical techniques to psychological conditioning that allows optimal performance under extreme stress. The contrast between these calibrated psychological methods and the emotional reactions of untrained secondary characters emphasizes the protagonist's professional detachment despite the personal stakes involved. Gathering intelligence about the antagonist force becomes a strategic priority during preparation. The protagonist might access information networks, contact former associates with relevant knowledge, analyze patterns from initial encounters, or employ surveillance to assess enemy capabilities. This intelligence operation reveals another dimension of their professional background. Not merely combat skills, but analytical capabilities essential for asymmetric engagement. Their approach to information gathering follows methodologies consistent with their background, whether military reconnaissance protocols, intelligence agency analysis, or criminal network infiltration techniques. Weapons preparation often serves as visual shorthand for the protagonist's psychological recommitment to their former capabilities. Sequences showing them cleaning firearms, sharpening blades, preparing explosive devices, or organizing tactical equipment carry ritualistic weight beyond their practical necessity. These activities represent the protagonist's conscious decision to fully embrace the identity they attempted to abandon, acknowledging that half measures will prove insufficient against the threat they face. The methodical precision they bring to these preparations demonstrates muscle memory retained despite years of disuse. Timing considerations typically emerge as critical factors during the preparation phase. The protagonist estimates enemy response, timelines, calculates how long defensive positions can be maintained, or determines evacuation windows before routes become compromised. This temporal awareness creates tension through explicit countdowns or deadlines, establishing that preparation occurs under significant time pressure as antagonist forces mobilize their response. The protagonist's ability to make accurate time assessments based on operational experience contrasts with secondary characters' less calibrated sense of the developing threat timeline. Moments of doubt or hesitation may briefly interrupt the preparation sequence as the protagonist confronts the implications of returning to their former life. Perhaps they pause while handling weapons that trigger specific combat memories, or momentarily question whether they're making the right choice in abandoning the peaceful identity they work to establish. These moments of vulnerability humanize them while emphasizing the significance of their decision to re-engage with capabilities they deliberately suppressed. The most complex narratives allow the protagonist to experience genuine conflict about their choice, even while recognizing its necessity. Secondary characters often contribute unexpected resources or capabilities during the preparation phase. Perhaps a spouse reveals surprising adaptability under pressure. A child demonstrates useful knowledge about the local environment, or a colleague offers connections or skills the protagonist hadn't anticipated. These contributions create collaborative preparation rather than unilateral planning, suggesting the protagonist's new life has value beyond mere cover. The relationships they've built provide tangible advantages in the current crisis. This collaborative element emphasizes what the protagonist stands to lose if forced to abandon their constructed identity permanently. The protagonist's preparations culminate in the first direct engagement with antagonist forces, transforming theoretical threat into kinetic reality. What begins as controlled interception often evolves into chaotic exchange as opposing forces make contact. This initial clash typically occurs on terms partially dictated by the protagonist, perhaps choosing the engagement location, determining timing, or establishing environmental parameters, while lacking the full tactical advantage of completely controlled operations. This measured approach reflects the protagonist's strategic thinking and operational planning capabilities. The deliberate nature of this engagement reveals their methodical approach to conflict. They're not merely reacting to enemy action, but shaping the battlefield according to professional assessment. Tactical sequences during this initial engagement showcase specialized capabilities that confirm the protagonist's extraordinary background. Movement patterns display efficiency beyond civilian training. Weapon handling demonstrates muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions, and situational awareness reveals perpetual environmental scanning that never truly deactivated. During civilian life, secondary characters witnessing these capabilities experience another dimension of revelation. While intellectually processing the protagonist's disclosed background, they now observe physical manifestation of abstract concepts. The difference between understanding someone was once a specialized operative, and watching them systematically neutralize multiple opponents creates dramatic recalibration of their perception. Communication during combat often shifts dramatically as the protagonist abandons civilian speech patterns for operational terminology. Sentence structure becomes clipped and precise. Specialized jargon emerges without translation, and voice modulation changes to optimize clarity under stress conditions. This linguistic transformation represents another layer of identity revelation. The protagonist now communicates as their operational self without filtering through civilian persona. Secondary characters might struggle to follow these communications, finding themselves functionally excluded from tactical exchanges occurring in specialized language they lack training to comprehend. This communication shift symbolizes broader identity transition as the protagonist moves fully into operational modality. The protagonist typically employs measured force during initial confrontation, calibrating response against threat assessment while maintaining tactical reserve. Rather than immediately deploying maximum capabilities, they systematically escalate through force continuum based on opposition resistance. This measured approach demonstrates professional discipline. They're not engaged in emotional combat, but executing operational protocols designed for efficiency and control. Their performance under pressure reveals training specifically designed for high-stress engagements where emotional responses must remain subordinate to tactical objectives. This controlled application distinguishes the protagonist from antagonists, who often display less disciplined approaches, reflecting inferior training or compromised objectivity. Secondary characters frequently experience protection protocols activating during initial confrontation as the protagonist implements defensive measures while engaging threats. These protective actions typically occur simultaneously with offensive operations, perhaps establishing cover positions while advancing on targets, creating extraction routes while neutralizing immediate dangers, or deploying communication countermeasures while maintaining situational control. This multitasking demonstrates the protagonist's ability to manage complex tactical problems across multiple domains simultaneously, confirming operational background beyond specialized combat skills to include comprehensive engagement management. Capabilities. Improvisational adaptation becomes necessary as engagement realities inevitably differ from scenario planning. The protagonist must modify tactical approaches in real time, adapting to unexpected resistance, unforeseen environmental factors, or unpredicted adversary capabilities. Their performance during these improvised sequences reveals another dimension of their training, not merely execution of established protocols, but creative application of fundamental principles under non-standard conditions. This adaptability distinguishes truly elite operators from merely competent personnel, demonstrating capacity for effective function beyond procedural parameters when operational variables exceed preparation boundaries. The antagonist forces often reveal unexpected capabilities during initial confrontation, presenting technical, tactical, or personnel resources beyond intelligence estimates. These surprising elements might include specialized equipment unavailable to civilian organizations, operational methodologies associated with specific military or intelligence units, or personnel demonstrating training consistent with elite programs. These revelations force the protagonist to rapidly reassess the threat nature while adapting tactical approaches to address enhanced opposition capabilities. Their analytical processing during this reassessment demonstrates another dimension of their operational background. Intelligence assessment capabilities functioning simultaneously with kinetic engagement. Tactical efficiency during initial confrontation frequently disturb secondary characters despite intellectual understanding of the protagonist's background. The clinical precision applied to neutralizing human threats, emotional detachment during otherwise traumatic scenarios, and methodical progression through tactical problems, regardless of conventional moral considerations, creates cognitive dissonance. For observers, the conceptual understanding that someone was once a specialized operative differs dramatically from witnessing the physical reality of professional violence application. These moments force secondary characters to reconcile the compassionate individual they've known with the efficient operative functioning before them, raising questions about compartmentalization versus integration within the protagonist's identity. Brief. Moments of tactical vulnerability sometimes emerge during initial confrontation as the protagonist navigates the transition from civilian patterns to operational functionality. Muscle memory requiring millisecond timing may need recalibration, Situational awareness routines might temporarily overload after prolonged disuse, or psychological transition between identities could create momentary hesitation. These transitory vulnerabilities reveal the protagonist as extraordinary but human. Their capabilities remain exceptional despite imperfect implementation after dormancy periods. Their rapid compensation for these vulnerabilities demonstrates another aspect of their advanced training: performance recovery protocols that minimize compromise duration when operational perfection temporarily falters. The protagonist often experiences time perception alteration during initial confrontation, as specialized training activates perceptual modulation conditioned through thousands of high-stress repetitions. Chaotic seconds expand into manageable decision-making windows. Overwhelming sensory input organizes into prioritized assessment hierarchies, and multiple threat vectors resolve into sequential engagement parameters. These perceptual modifications allow processing and response capacities beyond normal human parameters, enabling effective function in scenarios that would overwhelm conventional capabilities. The protagonist's performance under these conditions reveals psychological conditioning beyond technical training. They've been specifically prepared for cognitive function under extreme stress. Environmental manipulation often proves crucial during initial confrontation, as the protagonist leverages location characteristics for tactical advantage. They might utilize architectural features for cover progression, exploit terrain elevation for positional dominance, or employ ambient conditions for sensory advantage against less prepared opponents. This environmental exploitation demonstrates tactical intelligence beyond combat skills. They perceive operational environments as multi-dimensional engagement spaces rather than merely backgrounds for conflict. Their effective utilization of these elements reveals training specifically designed for comprehensive environmental assessment and exploitation during tactical engagements. Unexpected emotional responses occasionally emerge during initial confrontation, as the protagonist processes the implications of returning to operational function. Despite extensive conditioning designed to minimize psychological interference during tactical engagements, the stark transition from civilian identity to combat functionality might trigger momentary reactions. Perhaps brief flashes of regret, unwanted muscle memory satisfaction, or compartmentalization strain. These reactions reveal the protagonist's complex relationship with their dual identity. Regardless of operational necessity, resuming violent capabilities carries psychological consequences after authentically embracing civilian existence. Their management of these responses demonstrates psychological resilience beyond tactical capabilities. The initial confrontation often concludes with temporary disengagement rather than definitive resolution. The protagonist might neutralize immediate threats while recognizing the encounter represents merely opening moves in extended conflict. Tactical withdrawal frequently follows initial exchange, allowing reassessment based on newly acquired intelligence about antagonist capabilities. This strategic disengagement demonstrates the protagonist's professional approach to conflict. They're not pursuing emotional satisfaction through continued engagement, but maintaining objective focus on overall situation management. Their willingness to disengage, despite tactical advantage, reveals operational maturity and strategic perspective beyond immediate combat considerations. Aftermath assessment follows initial confrontation as the protagonist processes engagement. Results and implications. They might evaluate performance effectiveness, analyze opponent capabilities, assess collateral impacts, or calculate strategic adjustments needed for subsequent encounters. This analytical approach demonstrates their professional methodology, treating combat as technical problem requiring objective assessment rather than emotional experience. Their dispassionate evaluation reveals another dimension of specialized training, where operational improvement requires clinical analysis unclouded by conventional reactions to violence. This assessment process completes the operational cycle, initiated by threat recognition, moving from theoretical preparation through practical application to analytical evaluation. The antagonist organization responds to their initial defeat with methodical escalation, deploying resources that reveal the true scale of their capabilities. What began as a limited operation transforms into a coordinated campaign, as they recognize the protagonist represents a more significant threat than initially assessed. Surveillance assets multiply, specialized operatives are activated, and command structures shift to prioritize neutralizing this unexpected resistance. This mobilization demonstrates the antagonist organization's depth and reach, while establishing that the conflict has moved beyond localized skirmish to strategic confrontation. The increasing response validates the protagonist's worst fears. They haven't merely defeated a random threat, but awakened a systematic opponent with substantial resources. Intelligence reports begin filtering in through the protagonist's reactivated networks, revealing alarming details about the approaching enemy forces. The composition of these forces typically indicates specialized targeting, units specifically chosen to counter the protagonist's known capabilities. Perhaps counterinsurgency teams replace standard operatives. Technological specialists arrive to overcome security measures, or psychological warfare experts join tactical teams. This tailored response confirms the antagonists have identified the protagonist's specific background, shifting from generic engagement to customized opposition. The protagonist recognizes signature methodologies in the developing approach, perhaps identifying specific agencies, units, or training programs being deployed against them. The antagonists frequently elevate the stakes by expanding their targeting beyond the protagonist to include secondary characters or civilian infrastructure. Family members face specific threats, colleagues come under surveillance, or community locations significant to the protagonist become potential targets. This widening threat perimeter forces the protagonist to extend their protective efforts across multiple fronts, stretching their resources and attention. The expanded targeting serves both tactical purpose, creating vulnerabilities by dividing the protagonist's focus, and psychological pressure by transforming personal connections into potential weaknesses. This escalation often triggers difficult decisions about prioritization and protection strategies, as the protagonist cannot secure everything simultaneously. Environmental conditions often intensify during the escalation phase, with weather, terrain, or civilian activities creating additional complications. Perhaps approaching storms limit visibility and communication, urban environments restrict maneuverability, or public events increase civilian presence in potential conflict zones. These environmental factors create tactical constraints while introducing innocent bystanders who might become collateral damage. The protagonist must adapt their planning to account for these conditions, typically displaying specialized knowledge about operating under adverse circumstances that further confirms their professional background. The antagonist leadership frequently becomes more directly involved during escalation, moving from distant oversight to active participation as they recognize the significance of the developing situation. This leadership engagement might remain unseen, but felt through strategic sophistication in the opposition's approach, or might manifest through direct communication, attempting to demoralize the protagonist. The emergence of higher authority within the antagonist organization transforms the conflict from tactical engagement to strategic confrontation, while potentially revealing connections between the antagonists and the protagonist's former life. Personal history often complicates this leadership involvement. Perhaps the antagonist commander shares background with the protagonist, participated in their training, or possesses specific knowledge of their capabilities. Specialized weaponry or technology increasingly appears as the antagonists deploy more sophisticated resources against the protagonist. Standard firearms give way to advanced weapon systems. Basic surveillance evolves into cutting-edge tracking technology, and generic tactics transform into specialized methodologies. This technological escalation forces corresponding adaptation from the protagonist, who must counter increasingly sophisticated threats with limited resources. The advanced nature of these deployments often indicates institutional backing behind the antagonists, suggesting government agencies, military operations, or massively funded criminal organizations rather than limited opposition. This institutional support establishes that the protagonist faces not merely individual adversaries, but systematic opposition with substantial resources. Information warfare frequently accompanies physical escalation as antagonists attempt to undermine the protagonist's position through non-kinetic means. They might release compromising information about the protagonist's past, create false allegations about current activities, or fabricate evidence implicating allies in criminal behavior. These information operations target both practical support systems and psychological stability, attempting to isolate the protagonist by turning public opinion or institutional resources against them. The protagonist must counter these narratives while maintaining operational focus, demonstrating capabilities beyond physical combat to include strategic communication and counterintelligence measures. The escalation often reveals deeper background, connections between the protagonist and the antagonist organization, transforming what initially appeared to be random targeting into something more personal. Perhaps the protagonist previously operated against this organization, participated in operations that damaged their interests, or possesses specific knowledge threatening their current objectives. This historical connection explains the disproportionate response while raising questions about whether the initial attack was truly coincidental or represented long-planned retaliation. The revelation of these connections forces the protagonist to reconsider the conflict's nature, recognizing they face not merely present danger, but consequences of past actions. Psychological pressure intensifies as antagonists employ tactics specifically designed to destabilize the protagonist emotionally. They might reference classified operations from the protagonist's past, demonstrate knowledge of personal history unknown to current associates, or employ psychological triggers established during previous encounters. These psychological operations represent sophisticated understanding of the protagonist's background, suggesting either extensive intelligence gathering or direct knowledge of their training and experience. The protagonist's ability to maintain composure under this targeted pressure reveals another dimension of their specialized preparation. Psychological resilience techniques that allow continued function despite emotional manipulation attempts. Civilian. Authorities or institutions often become complications during escalation, as antagonists manipulate official systems against the protagonist. Local police might receive false reports identifying the protagonist as dangerous. Financial systems suddenly restrict access to resources, or regulatory agencies initiate investigations based on fabricated evidence. These institutional pressures create additional fronts requiring attention while limiting the protagonist's freedom of movement and access to resources. The protagonist typically displays sophisticated understanding of navigating these systems, employing countermeasures that suggest extensive experience operating within and against official frameworks. Technological vulnerabilities created during the protagonist's civilian existence frequently become attack vectors during escalation. Digital footprints established for cover authenticity provide access points for surveillance or tracking. Communication. Patterns with family and associates create predictable behaviors that can be exploited. Even physical locations associated with civilian identity, homes, workplaces, regularly visited establishments, become tactical vulnerabilities once identified. The antagonist's exploitation of these civilian-created weaknesses highlights the fundamental incompatibility between maintaining authentic cover and operational security, demonstrating that the protagonist's attempt to fully inhabit their peaceful identity necessarily compromised their tactical position. The antagonists often demonstrate disturbing knowledge about the protagonist's contingency plans or safe locations, compromising fallback positions and evacuation routes believed secure. This infiltration of supposedly protected information creates crisis of both practical security and psychological confidence. If these measures have been compromised, what else might be exposed? The protagonist must rapidly determine the extent of the security breach while developing new contingencies under extreme pressure. This compromise frequently raises questions about potential moles within the protagonist's support network, creating paranoia that further complicates their reliance on allies. Deadline compression accelerates during escalation as antagonists create time-sensitive threats requiring immediate response. Perhaps hostages face declining situations, explosive devices operate on timers, or biological agents present progressive danger. These temporal pressures force the protagonist to act with decreased preparation, accepting greater risk due to compressed planning timelines. The introduction of these time-critical elements transforms methodical strategic development into crisis response, testing the protagonist's ability to function effectively under extreme pressure. Their performance in these accelerated circumstances reveals training specifically designed for time-compressed decision-making under life-threatening conditions. Former adversaries from the protagonist's operational past occasionally emerge during escalation, either as primary antagonists or specialized assets deployed specifically against them. These individuals bring personal history that complicates the conflict, perhaps previous encounters where the protagonist prevailed, creating motivation for revenge, or past operations where these adversaries demonstrated particular capabilities that concerned even the highly trained protagonist. The emergence of these specific threats from the protagonist's history personalizes the conflict while introducing opponents with detailed understanding of their methods and potential weaknesses. These specialized adversaries often target psychological vulnerabilities based on their knowledge of the protagonist's operational history. The protagonist frequently identifies signature methodologies within the escalating opposition that reveal specific training programs or operational units involved in the response. They might recognize particular tactical approaches, equipment configurations, or communication protocols associated with specialized military units, intelligence agencies, or criminal organizations. This recognition allows more effective counter-planning, while potentially revealing institutional involvement beyond the immediately visible antagonists. The protagonist's ability to identify these methodological signatures demonstrates both extensive operational experience and sophisticated analytical capabilities, confirming their elite background through knowledge as well as skills. Escalation often forces the protagonist to consider courses of action previously rejected as too extreme or morally questionable. As conventional responses prove insufficient against mounting opposition, tactical options expand to include approaches the protagonist deliberately abandoned when leaving their former life. This consideration creates internal conflict as they confront whether survival justifies returning to methodologies they rejected on ethical grounds. The protagonist's decision process regarding these extreme measures reveals their current moral framework and the degree to which they've evolved beyond their operational conditioning. Some maintain newly established ethical boundaries despite tactical disadvantage, while others pragmatically accept regression to former methodologies as necessity. The antagonist's escalation frequently includes efforts to isolate the protagonist from support systems, systematically eliminating potential assistance through coercion, deception, or direct action. Allies find themselves neutralized through arrest on fabricated charges. Family members face threats requiring protective evacuation, or communication systems become compromised, preventing coordination. This isolation strategy forces the protagonist toward self-reliance while creating vulnerability through lack of support. Their response to this forced independence reveals both their capability for autonomous operation and their psychological reliance on connections established during civilian life. Those who maintained operational self-sufficiency adapt more readily than those who fully integrated into collaborative civilian existence. The moment of ultimate confrontation arrives as conflict trajectories converge toward inevitable collision. The protagonist has exhausted alternatives to direct engagement, diplomatic approaches rejected, evasion no longer viable, defensive positions compromised. The antagonist forces have marshaled their most significant capabilities, deploying elite personnel and advanced resources against this unexpectedly formidable opponent. Environmental conditions often intensify the dramatic tension. Perhaps darkness falls, weather deteriorates, or civilian presence creates additional complications. These elements combine to create the narrative's crucible, where the protagonist's true capabilities will be fully tested against the most dangerous opposition, Strategic preparation gives way to tactical improvisation as carefully constructed plans inevitably encounter friction upon implementation. The protagonist must adapt rapidly to unexpected developments. Perhaps antagonists approach from unanticipated directions, employ unforeseen technologies, or demonstrate capabilities beyond intelligence estimates. This adaptation under extreme pressure reveals the protagonist's professional foundation, training designed specifically for chaotic operational environments where perfect information is impossible. Their ability to recalibrate tactics while maintaining strategic objectives demonstrates advanced operational experience beyond basic combat skills. Secondary characters frequently play crucial roles during climactic confrontation, often transitioning from liabilities to assets as they apply newly developed skills under extreme circumstances. The spouse demonstrates surprising aptitude with recently taught weapon handling. The colleague executes communication protocols with unexpected precision, or the child displays remarkable courage following emergency instructions. These contributions from ordinary individuals create collaborative victory rather than solo heroism, suggesting the protagonist's civilian connections provide strength rather than vulnerability. Their successful integration of non-professional personnel into tactical operations reveals leadership capabilities beyond individual combat proficiency. The protagonist typically experiences moments where professional training conflicts with personal attachments, creating decision points that reveal their evolved values. Perhaps tactical advantage requires putting loved ones at calculated risk. Optimal positioning means abandoning vulnerable allies, or mission success demands emotional compartmentalization during crisis. Their resolution of these conflicts demonstrates character development, how their civilian identity has modified operational priorities that once emphasized objective completion above all considerations. The most complex narratives allow protagonists to harmonize rather than choose between these competing imperatives, finding solutions that honor both operational requirements and personal connections. Environmental exploitation becomes crucial as the protagonist leverages terrain features, architectural elements, or atmospheric conditions to compensate for numerical disadvantage. They might utilize elevation differences for tactical advantage, employ building infrastructure to control enemy movement, or use weather conditions to degrade enemy capabilities while operating through specialized training. This environmental manipulation demonstrates their tactical creativity while highlighting the comprehensive nature of their operational background. They've been trained not merely to fight effectively, but to transform any environment into optimized battle space. Through analytical assessment and adaptive implementation, the antagonist leadership often emerges during climactic confrontation, abandoning safety of distance command to directly engage when subordinates prove insufficient. This leadership appearance frequently reveals personal connections to the protagonist, perhaps former colleagues, rivals from training, or participants in shared operations. The leader's direct participation transforms the conflict from purely tactical engagement to personal reckoning, with dialogue often exposing deeper history that contextualizes the current confrontation. This background revelation adds psychological dimension to physical conflict, while potentially explaining motivations beyond immediate objectives. Specialized capabilities previously concealed frequently emerge during climactic confrontation as the protagonist accesses deeply embedded training or equipment saved for extreme necessity. Perhaps they demonstrate fighting techniques deliberately hidden due to their classified nature, deploy specialized weapons maintained in deepest contingency. Reserves or access psychological conditioning activated only under specific threat conditions. These capability revelations suggest the protagonist's previously demonstrated skills represented merely surface elements of their true capacity, implying even their operational identity contained concealed depths beneath visible expertise. Tactical sequences during climactic confrontation typically showcase the protagonist's comprehensive capabilities rather than isolated skills. They might seamlessly transition between multiple combat modalities, shifting from ranged weapons to close-quarters techniques to improvised implements as circumstances demand. Perhaps they coordinate complex operations across multiple domains, simultaneously maintaining communication discipline while executing physical maneuvers while deploying technological countermeasures. This multidimensional competence demonstrates their elite operational background, confirming they aren't merely skilled in isolated techniques, but comprehensively trained for complex engagements requiring integrated capabilities. The protagonist often suffers significant injury during climactic confrontation, forcing them to continue operations while managing physical compromise. These injuries create additional complications while demonstrating their extraordinary resilience and pain management training. Operating effectively despite significant trauma reveals psychological conditioning beyond ordinary parameters, perhaps specialized programs that enable continued function under conditions that would incapacitate normal individuals. Their technique often becomes more stripped down and pragmatic as injury forces efficiency, eliminating performative elements and revealing core methodologies from their foundational training. Communication between protagonist and antagonist frequently occurs during combat engagements, creating opportunities for revelation and psychological manipulation. Antagonists might attempt demoralization through disclosing previously unknown information, questioning the protagonist's understanding of their own history, or suggesting betrayal by trusted allies. These psychological operations conducted during physical conflict test the protagonist's cognitive compartmentalization, their ability to process potentially destabilizing information while maintaining tactical focus. The most capable protagonists transform these psychological attacks into intelligence gathering, extracting valuable information from antagonists attempting manipulation. Moments of apparent defeat often punctuate the climactic confrontation, creating narrative valleys before ultimate resolution. The protagonist might find themselves temporarily overpowered, their tactical position compromised, or their resources depleted beyond sustainable levels. These low points test their psychological resilience, the ability to maintain operational focus despite overwhelming evidence of imminent failure. Their response to apparent defeat reveals both training designed for worst-case scenarios and character development beyond professional conditioning. Some find strength in defending loved ones, others in ethical principles developed during civilian life, while some access deeper training specifically designed for continuing function when objective assessment indicates mission failure. The protagonist frequently employs signature techniques or methodologies during climactic confrontation that identify specific training backgrounds or operational histories. These distinctive approaches might be recognized by knowledgeable antagonists, creating moments where their specific background receives explicit acknowledgement. That Sentinel program methodology, or only Obsidian Group operators use that technique. These recognitions validate the protagonist's elite background through external confirmation, while potentially revealing institutional affiliations they've concealed even from those aware of their general operational history. The specificity of these identifications suggests their training wasn't merely advanced, but highly specialized within already elite parameters. Multiple antagonists with different capability profiles often engage simultaneously during climactic confrontation, forcing the protagonist to rapidly adapt to diverse threat types. They might face technically advanced opponents employing sophisticated equipment alongside brutally effective close combat specialists, while countering psychological warfare experts attempting to compromise decision-making. This threat diversity prevents reliance on specialized techniques optimized for particular opponents, requiring comprehensive tactical flexibility. The protagonist's effectiveness against these varied threat profiles demonstrates training designed specifically for asymmetric engagements against unknown capabilities, the hallmark of truly elite operational preparation. Tactical innovation frequently emerges during climactic confrontation as the protagonist develops novel applications of training or equipment to address unprecedented situations. Perhaps they employ techniques from different disciplines in unorthodox combinations, repurpose equipment for functions beyond intended parameters, or apply methodologies from specialized contexts to current circumstances where they weren't designed to function. These innovations reveal not merely comprehensive training, but advanced conceptual understanding of tactical principles underlying specific techniques. Their ability to extrapolate fundamental concepts rather than merely execute established procedures distinguishes truly elite operators from those with merely technical proficiency. The protagonist often demonstrates extraordinary situational awareness during climactic confrontation, maintaining comprehensive understanding of complex, rapidly evolving tactical environments. They track multiple threat vectors simultaneously, anticipate developing patterns before full manifestation, and perceive subtle environmental cues indicating imminent actions. This hyper-awareness suggests specialized perceptual training beyond standard operational preparation, perhaps programs specifically designed to enhance sensory processing or analytical frameworks that organize chaotic information into recognizable patterns. Their ability to maintain this awareness under extreme stress further indicates psychological conditioning optimized for performance under conditions that overwhelm normal cognitive capacity. Decisive action often emerges from momentary advantage rather than overwhelming superiority, with the protagonist recognizing and exploiting temporary opportunities within chaotic engagement. They might identify microscopic hesitations in opponent movements, leverage momentary environmental changes, or recognize patterns indicating imminent vulnerability. This opportunistic exploitation demonstrates both continuous analytical processing during combat and extensive operational experience that allows pattern recognition too subtle for less seasoned practitioners to perceive. Their ability to convert fleeting tactical openings into decisive advantage represents the culmination of extensive real-world application beyond theoretical training. The climactic confrontation typically includes moments where the protagonist consciously chooses between operational methodologies representing different aspects of their identity. Perhaps they must decide between brutally efficient approaches from their former life and more restrained techniques developed during civilian existence. Maybe they confront whether mission objectives justify collateral damage once considered acceptable, but now ethically troubling. These decision points reveal which elements of their dual identities have become dominant through conscious integration rather than circumstantial necessity. Their choices demonstrate character evolution beyond the tactical parameters of the immediate confrontation. As the smoke clears from the final confrontation, the protagonist stands victorious but transformed. The calculated precision that defined their operational identity now carries subtle influences from their civilian existence. Perhaps mercy, where once there would have been only efficiency or consideration for collateral impact beyond mission parameters. Their victory isn't merely tactical but represents successful integration of their compartmentalized selves, forging a new identity that honors both their specialized capabilities and their hard-won humanity. Secondary characters process what they've witnessed with complex reactions, reflecting their journey through revelation and conflict. Initial shock at the protagonist's concealed identity has evolved into nuanced understanding that the person they knew wasn't fabrication, but selective truth. The spouse who once questioned whether their entire relationship was constructed cover now recognizes authentic connection beneath necessary concealment. Children who struggled to reconcile the nurturing parent with the lethal operative now understand their protection was always the protagonist's primary mission, merely expressed through different methodologies at different times. The antagonist organization has been neutralized, perhaps through elimination of key leadership, exposure of operations to authorities, or strategic compromise that removes immediate threat. This resolution creates temporary security, while acknowledging the protagonist's specialized world never permits permanent safety. Institutional opponents might be temporarily deterred, vengeful elements might require time to regroup, or power vacuums might prevent immediate retaliation. This qualified victory provides breathing room rather than definitive conclusion, reflecting the protagonist's realistic understanding that complete elimination of threat remains impossible given their background. Physical aftermath reveals the conflict's toll through environmental damage, healing wounds, and depleted resources. The protagonist's home may require rebuilding, injuries demand recovery time, and operational supplies need replenishment. These tangible consequences create transition period where tactical concerns gradually yield to practical considerations of restoration. The protagonist might direct this recovery with the same methodical approach they applied to combat operations, demonstrating their ability to adapt specialized skills to constructive rather than destructive applications. Relational recalibration follows as connections strained by revelation and conflict find new equilibrium. Trust damaged by long-term deception requires rebuilding through transparent communication. Authority dynamics shifted by operational necessity return to collaborative partnership. The protagonist must navigate these transitions while honestly addressing questions their revealed identity created. This interpersonal reconstruction often proves more challenging than tactical operations, requiring emotional intelligence that might have atrophied during their compartmentalized existence. The protagonist makes conscious decisions about their path forward, typically establishing balanced integration between operational capabilities and civilian existence rather than returning to rigid compartmentalization. They might maintain vigilance without paranoia, preserve capabilities without living in constant readiness, or retain connections to their specialized world without being defined by it. This integration represents character evolution catalyzed by crisis. They emerge neither fully the operative nor completely the civilian, but something new that incorporates valuable elements of both identities. The narrative closes with symbolic representation of this new integration, perhaps the protagonist teaching defensive skills to family members with patience rather than tactical efficiency, applying specialized knowledge to everyday problems without revealing its origins, or maintaining subtle security measures that don't disrupt normal life. These moments demonstrate their success in achieving what once seemed impossible: authentic existence incorporating all aspects of their complex identity. Institutional relationships often require careful management during the resolution phase. The protagonist might negotiate delicate arrangements with former employers, establish boundaries with intelligence agencies drawn by their re-emergence, or create unofficial understandings with law enforcement authorities aware of recent events. These institutional accommodations typically involve mutual recognition without formal acknowledgement, tacit agreements that provide operational latitude, while maintaining plausible deniability. The protagonist's approach to these negotiations reveals sophisticated understanding of bureaucratic mechanics alongside practical assessment of their leverage, following recent demonstrations of capability. Future security planning emerges as the protagonist implements preventative measures against potential threats beyond immediate antagonists. They might establish early warning systems monitoring specific indicators, develop contingency protocols for various threat scenarios, or create distributed resource caches accessible during potential future emergencies. These security measures reflect their realistic assessment that while immediate danger has passed, their background creates perpetual vulnerability requiring systematic management. The protagonist's approach to these preparations demonstrates both operational thoroughness and philosophical acceptance of their complex position between worlds. Legacy implications from the conflict frequently create lingering complications requiring ongoing attention. Media coverage of dramatic events might generate unwanted scrutiny. Physical evidence from operational activities could attract investigative interest, or surviving antagonist elements might monitor developments from distance while planning future moves. The protagonist must methodically address these legacy issues while preventing their resolution efforts from creating additional complications. Their approach to these problems demonstrates strategic thinking beyond tactical time horizons. They're securing not merely immediate safety, but sustainable future security through comprehensive consideration of potential consequences. Secondary. Characters often display accelerated personal growth following their immersion in the protagonist's operational reality. The colleague applies newly recognized courage to professional challenges they previously avoided. The spouse approaches relationship dynamics with refreshed appreciation for authentic communication, or the friend demonstrates increased resilience when facing ordinary life difficulties. These transformations suggest their exposure to extraordinary circumstances created lasting personal evolution rather than temporary trauma responses. The protagonist witnesses these changes with complex emotions, responsibility for involving loved ones in dangerous situations balanced against pride in their remarkable adaptation. Knowledge transmission often occurs during resolution as the protagonist selectively shares specialized expertise with civilian associates deemed trustworthy and capable. They might teach basic defensive techniques to family members, instruct colleagues in surveillance detection fundamentals, or guide trusted friends through communication security protocols. This knowledge sharing represents calculated risk management, minor operational security compromise balanced against practical protection for vulnerable associates. Their teaching approach often reveals how deeply they've integrated their dual identities, translating specialized concepts into accessible frameworks while maintaining technical precision necessary for effective application. Philosophical reconciliation frequently emerges as the protagonist processes their journey through complementary lenses of operational assessment and emotional reflection. They might evaluate tactical performance while considering ethical implications of their actions, analyze strategic decisions while acknowledging emotional factors that influence their choices, or assess security outcomes while recognizing relational impacts of their methodologies. This multi-dimensional processing demonstrates successful integration of their compartmentalized selves. They can simultaneously apply professional analytical frameworks and personal value systems without either dominating their assessment. Symbolic gestures of identity integration often punctuate the resolution phase as the protagonist establishes rituals bridging their dual worlds. Perhaps they maintain operational readiness through training regimens redesigned for family participation, transform security protocols into household routines, supporting rather than disrupting daily life, or adapt specialized skills to community service applications. These adaptation patterns demonstrate creative harmonization of seemingly contradictory identities, suggesting the protagonist has transcended binary conception of themselves as either operative or civilian to embrace more complex, integrated existence, incorporating elements of both worlds. Future preparation takes more balanced form as the protagonist develops capabilities serving both operational readiness and civilian flourishing. They might establish community connections, providing both social support and intelligence networks, develop professional skills applicable in both specialized operations and ordinary employment, or create financial resources supporting both emergency contingencies and family development. This multifunctional preparation demonstrates evolution beyond compartmentalized existence, where resources served either operational or civilian purposes toward integrated approach, where investments simultaneously support both aspects of their identity. Psychological healing progresses as the protagonist processes operational experiences through frameworks incorporating both professional assessment and emotional awareness. They might analyze tactical decisions while acknowledging their psychological impact, evaluate operational choices while considering their moral implications, or assess security protocols while recognizing their relational consequences. This integrated processing represents significant evolution from compartmentalized psychological management, typical during active operations, suggesting the protagonist has developed more holistic approach to self-understanding, incorporating both specialized training and human experience. Renewed bonds with selected operational associates occasionally emerge during resolution as the protagonist maintains carefully curated connections to their former world. They might establish communication channels with trusted former colleagues, create informal information sharing arrangements with specific institutional contacts, or develop supportive relationships with others who have navigated similar transitions between specialized and civilian existence. These selective connections demonstrate sophisticated boundary management, maintaining access to operational resources while preventing these associations from compromising their primary civilian identity or creating security vulnerabilities through excessive exposure. Legacy management requires ongoing attention as the protagonist addresses physical, digital, and institutional remnants of their operational past that could threaten their new equilibrium. They might systematically eliminate documentation connecting their identities, establish legal structures protecting civilian assets from specialized world complications, or develop cover narratives explaining recent events without revealing their true nature. This methodical approach to legacy management demonstrates operational thoroughness applied to identity protection rather than mission objectives. Their specialized capabilities now serve personal security rather than institutional directives. Vigilance, calibration, represents significant challenge as the protagonist establishes sustainable security awareness appropriate for their integrated existence. They must determine appropriate threat assessment levels, develop monitoring protocols, balance between effectiveness and obsession, and establish response thresholds, distinguishing between ordinary concerns and genuine dangers. This calibration process demonstrates sophisticated risk management beyond binary operational settings. They're not merely assessing whether threats exist, but determining proportional response appropriate for maintaining civilian functionality while addressing potential dangers. Their approach reveals whether they've achieved genuine integration or merely superficial accommodation between their dual identities. The passage of time reveals the lasting impact of events as the protagonist settles into their newly integrated existence. 6 months have transformed immediate aftermath into sustainable patterns, establishing rhythms, balancing vigilance with genuine civilian engagement. Morning routines now include subtle security checks alongside ordinary breakfast preparations, perimeter assessments disguised as casual garden walks, communication security embedded within normal device usage, situational awareness maintained through apparently casual observation. These natural-seeming habits represent successful integration of operational protocols into civilian life, creating security without sacrificing authenticity. Family dynamics have evolved through honest conversation and mutual adaptation. The spouse, who once struggled with betrayal, now participates in modified security protocols, understanding their purpose while ensuring they don't dominate household life. Children previously frightened by their parents' operational identity now absorb carefully selected lessons in awareness and self-protection, framed through age-appropriate contexts that balance preparation against paranoia. These adaptations demonstrate two-way integration rather than one-sided imposition. The protagonist hasn't merely grafted civilian elements onto operational foundation, but genuinely merged distinct worlds through reciprocal accommodation. Professional. Reorientation marks another adaptation as the protagonist develops career applications for transferable skills. Perhaps they've established security consulting services utilizing analytical capabilities without revealing specialized background, created problem-solving methodologies drawing on operational experience without disclosing sources, or developed teaching approaches transmitting valuable knowledge while obscuring classified origins. This professional evolution demonstrates creative translation between worlds, specialized capabilities finding legitimate expression through channels compatible with civilian identity rather than compartmentalized separation between operational history and present function. Community integration continues with careful calibration as the protagonist builds local connections, providing both personal fulfillment and strategic advantage. They might participate in neighborhood organizations, offering genuine community contribution while establishing environmental awareness, develop relationships with key municipal figures, creating both authentic friendship and potential resource access, or volunteer with emergency response groups, allowing skill application while building crisis-relevant networks. This multidimensional community engagement demonstrates sophisticated balance between operational thinking and authentic civilian participation, creating security advantages through legitimate social connection rather than manipulative exploitation. Periodic contact with former operational associates maintains carefully managed intelligence awareness without compromising civilian priorities. Casual meetings with trusted former colleagues provide information exchange disguised as ordinary friendship. Electronic communications employ subtle coding systems embedding relevant data within innocent exchanges, and occasional specialized gatherings maintain capabilities through apparent recreational activities. These connections represent selective boundary permeability rather than complete segregation or full immersion. The protagonist maintains situational awareness through deliberate points of contact while preventing these associations from dominating. Their recalibrated identity, the protagonist occasionally provides discreet assistance to former institutional affiliations when particular situations align with their specialized capabilities and ethical boundaries. These limited engagements typically involve advisory roles rather than direct action, consultation rather than field operations, or information analysis rather than physical intervention. Their selective participation demonstrates autonomous relationship with former world. They operate as independent contractor rather than subordinate asset, choosing involvement based on personal assessment rather than institutional obligation. These carefully bounded engagements allow constructive application of specialized knowledge while maintaining primary commitment to civilian existence. Anniversary reactions emerge around significant conflict dates as the protagonist processes traumatic experiences through integrated psychological frameworks. They might experience heightened vigilance during date ranges matching previous engagements, find themselves conducting more intensive security assessments when environmental factors mirror conflict conditions, or notice emotional responses triggered by sensory elements resembling operational scenarios. Their management of these reactions demonstrates psychological sophistication. They acknowledge these responses without allowing them to dominate behavior, recognize triggers without succumbing to hypervigilance, and process memories through healthy integration rather than compartmentalization or denial. Future. Planning takes comprehensive form, incorporating both operational contingencies and civilian aspirations. Financial structures simultaneously support ordinary family development and emergency resources. Educational pathways serve both personal interest and capability enhancement. Residential considerations balance lifestyle preferences against security requirements. This multifunctional approach to future development represents genuine integration rather than parallel planning. The protagonist doesn't maintain separate civilian and operational trajectories, but develops unified life structure accommodating all aspects of their complex identity within cohesive framework. Ethical evolution continues as the protagonist refines their moral framework through ongoing reflection on recent experiences. They might reconsider proportionality standards regarding defensive force, develop nuanced perspectives on transparency versus necessary concealment in relationships, or establish refined boundaries regarding justifiable risk acceptance when protecting others. This ethical development demonstrates commitment to continuous moral growth rather than fixed principles. They're incorporating lessons from recent experiences into evolving value system rather than reverting to operational parameters or uncritically adopting civilian norms. Philosophical perspectives deepen as the protagonist contemplates identity questions catalyzed by recent integration challenges. They might develop sophisticated understanding of authenticity, incorporating both operationally developed capabilities and civilian-nurtured connections. Recognize legitimate expression of core selfhood through multiple contextual manifestations, rather than singular, true identity, or acknowledge the valid, simultaneous existence of apparently contradictory self-elements within coherent whole. These philosophical insights represent intellectual integration, complementing behavioral adaptations. The protagonist has developed conceptual frameworks accommodating their complex existence alongside practical methods for navigating it. Occasional, localized threats emerge, requiring measured response, as the protagonist addresses potential dangers without operational overreaction. Perhaps they detect surveillance, requiring assessment and counteraction, identify suspicious patterns suggesting possible hostile interest, or receive information indicating potential targeting by secondary antagonist elements. Their response to these situations demonstrates calibrated security management. They employ necessary protective measures without disproportionate escalation, maintain appropriate vigilance without paranoid hyper-awareness, and implement targeted countermeasures without abandoning civilian functioning. This balanced approach confirms successful integration between operational capabilities and civilian priorities. The narrative concludes with moments symbolizing the protagonist's successful identity integration and forward trajectory. Perhaps they celebrate significant family occasion with both civilian friends and carefully selected operational associates present, demonstrating comfortable navigation between worlds previously kept rigidly separated. Maybe they apply specialized knowledge to resolve community challenge, utilizing operational capabilities through civilian framework without compromising either identity component. Or perhaps they simply experience moment of genuine peace, present-focused awareness, acknowledging both their extraordinary background and ordinary future, while accepting the complex wholeness they've achieved through crisis and resolution. Their journey reveals universal truths, transcending specialized circumstances, that authentic identity emerges not from rigid categorization, but integration of seemingly contradictory elements, that relationships built on selective truth can still contain genuine connection, requiring evolution rather than rejection when fully revealed, and that capabilities developed for particular purposes can find ethical application beyond their original context when guided by evolved consciousness. The protagonist's successful navigation between worlds demonstrates human capacity for continuous reinvention without losing core selfhood, adapting to extraordinary circumstances while maintaining essential humanity. As they move forward into uncertain future, balance between civilian aspirations and operational awareness, the protagonist carries valuable understanding that security comes not from perfect threat elimination, but sustainable vigilance. That relationship authenticity requires ongoing truth rather than complete disclosure, and that identity integration demands continuous calibration rather than fixed resolution. Their hard-won equilibrium remains dynamic rather than static, requiring perpetual adjustment as circumstances evolve. Yet this continuous adaptation represents success rather than limitation. They've achieved sustainable balance, allowing genuine engagement with all aspects of their multifaceted existence. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of identity, revelation, and integration. This narrative framework offers rich possibilities for character development across different storytelling contexts, from espionage thrillers to superhero narratives to science fiction explorations of hidden capabilities. If you've enjoyed this analytical journey through the hidden operative, returning to action trope, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into narrative structures and character development patterns. We'll continue examining how seemingly specialized story frameworks reveal universal human experiences through different contextual lenses. Subscribe now to continue the conversation about how stories reflect our own challenges of authentic self-expression in complex environments.